Welcome everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the NUS MEI's flagship series, ME 101. Thank you for joining us today. In our final lecture in the series, we are going to switch our attention to Central Asia. Recently, our chairman, Bilahari Kausikan, spoke of a new form of globalization, where in practice, events have broken down and rendered obsolete conventional geographical divisions of Eurasia to Europe, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, and Middle East. Instead, we should now think in terms of Eurasia. As the world moves towards greater multipolarity and fluidity, this Eurasian supercontinent, of which Central Asia is at the heart, is set to play an integral role in this future world order. And I think this is also part of what we mean when we decided to include this lecture in the series and title it Centrality of Central Asia. To tell us more about Central Asia, we have MEI's Principal Research Fellow, Dr. Alessandro Arduino, here today. Those of you who have been following the lectures from week to week might remember Dr. Arduino. He delivered one of the early lectures on the role of China in the Middle East. We're very pleased to welcome him back this week to talk about Central Asia. Aside from his position with MEI, Dr. Arduino is also the co-director of the Security and Crisis Management International Center at the Shanghai Academy of Social Science, and an external associate at Lao China Institute, King's College London. Dr. Arduino's 2 decades of experience in China encompass security analysis and crisis management. His main research interests include China, Central Asia, and Middle East and North Africa relations, sovereign wealth funds, private military companies, and private security companies, and China's security and foreign policy. He has published far and wide, among them several books as well as several articles in 3 different languages, Italian, English, and Mandarin. Dr. Arduino will speak first, and then we'll open for Q&A with the audience. We're also taking written questions, so you can send those in via the chat function addressed to either myself or the events team. So without further ado, over to you, Dr. Arduino. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for your 2 kind introduction. Good evening to everybody, and thank you for being here with us today at the closing series of MEI 101, the Middle East lecture series. I'm very excited to having the chance to talk with you today about Central Asia. And it's not by chance that the title of today's presentation is Centrality of Central Asia. And I see this not as a concluding event, but maybe as a starting point for the next year event, thanks to the fact that probably we are going to see an increase of importance and relationship between Asian and especially Singapore with Central Asia, despite the COVID-19. Considering that Central Asia, historically speaking, economically speaking, and even now in matter of international relation, has been quite neglected, in my personal opinion, from history book or for the global talk about international relation and strategy. Today, I'm just looking to give you a broader picture in a broader canvas about what is Central Asia, what are the main trends of Central Asia, and especially why here at the Middle East Institute we are talking about Central Asia. We don't have to forget that Arab influence in Central Asia, Islam as religion, and even in a pre-Islamic time when Persian influence was great in all Central Asia, several areas and several cities played a greater role as a renaissance of the civilization, not only in Central Asia, but in a broader area. So we can see it as a greater Middle East, or if we look with another angle perspective, as a greater Central Asia. Nowadays, the story about Central Asia is the fact that it's located at the heart of Europe, is Eurasia, the heart of Eurasia, and recent history is related to primary influence of Russia. But nowadays, there is an increasing income of Chinese investment in the area, and Eurasia, with Central Asia at the heart, is not only a bridge between East and West, China and Europe, but at the same time is going to be a north-south axis bridge between Eurasia, South Asia, and the Middle East. If you look at the map, basically, you are going to see most important thing about all Central Asia is the fact that the country in Central Asia are landlocked country. It means that you need to cross another country in order to reach the sea. Exception are the Caspian Sea and the Aral Sea, but basically are, with the Caspian Sea, the greatest saltwater lake in the world. And the Aral Sea, due to the change in climate change and to the increased use of water hydric resources, is shrinking by the day. And then if you look especially at this map and you look at Uzbekistan, Uzbekistan is only one of the two countries in the world, with Luxembourg, if I recall correct, that is double landlocked. It means that you have to cross two countries in order to reach the sea. So as you notice, these landlocked countries are in between, as I mentioned before, not only with China to the European Union, but also in a north-south axis that is linking with Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and then moving to the Middle East. What we define first and foremost as Central Asia. And this is not even an easy task because normally what we refer as Central Asia are 5 countries: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, the 5 that are present in this map from the United Nations. But if you see at research by academician, by multilateral development bank, by think tank, and even by government, several times Central Asia is defined with Mongolia being part of it, or even with Afghanistan being part of it, or related to Caucasus and Central Asia. So this is not just a case now, but all along recent history, we have been witnessing several labels related to Central Asia. This label, the most recent, refer to the new Silk Road economic belt, and this is the Chinese initiative that now is called Belt and Road Initiative, that not by chance started in 2013 in Nazarbayev University when in Kazakhstan, when President Xi Jinping presented the vision of the Silk Road economic belt. Then other labels that are attached to Central Asia are the one of the Iron Silk Road, and is the one that we used in 2010, 2015, basically in Russia, to see a kind of counter-altar to the Chinese increase in economic presence in Central Asia. And then a label that has been in the last 20 years used and abused is the new great game. I'm not going to criticize much the use of this label because even I utilized it several times in my paper, and it refers mainly to the game that were played in strategic, tactical, geopolitical term between greater empire, the British Empire, the Tsarist Empire, and later on during Soviet Union and other conflict in the area. Most importantly, another label is the one used by Sir Halford Mackinder. Mackinder in the early 20th century defined Central Asia as the key in terms of world domination. He called Central Asia the heartland in a so-called pivot area. Central Asia, according to Mackinder, was of utmost strategic importance for security in the 20th century, and his basically theory of world power was arguing that land-based power, it was more important than the convention at the time that was sea power. Invincible sea power was a theory advocated by Alfred Tyen Mahan during the century before, in the 19th century. But looking at today, definitely Central Asian countries, despite the pandemic and COVID-19, are aiming to return to a place of historical relevance, not only as a trading hub, but also as a cultural hub, as it happened during the great Central Asia Renaissance from the 7th century to the 14th century. In my personal opinion, up to now, there are still significant opportunity in the economy of Central Asia, and especially if the country, the 5 countries in Central Asia, are going to be able to face the challenge and all the socioeconomic transition process that they are called to overcome is going to be very important for cooperation, not only with China, with Russia, with the European Union, but especially with Asian countries and with Singapore. Having said that, if you didn't have the chance to listen to just 2 days ago, distinguished lecture by His Excellency Vladimir Norov, the Secretary General of the SCO here at the MEI Institute, and he was hosted by our chairman, Bilahari Kauzikan, I strongly encourage you to see the recorded version on YouTube. Having said that, as I mentioned before, these 5 countries started a transition, a socioeconomic transition with the same amount of problems, but during the latest 2 decades, they define a different developing pattern. So we see that we have Kazakhstan, Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, if we just go a little bit back to the map. And in the 1991, is quite a pivotal date for this country, is the date with the demise of the Soviet Union. Each one had to start its own pattern in facing socioeconomic transition and facing challenge of a changing international geopolitical order, on the demise of the bipolar order, and especially the fact that they started sharing the same challenge, and this challenge are national identity, coming from from the Soviet Union, where the lingua franca was Russian, a close proximity to major power, cross-border resource management, underinvestment, poverty in several areas, infrastructure that were not able to provide sustainable development, and especially create a job for a very young population. This country, if we see the overall Central Asia, we are not going to see a greater population. We are going to see 72 million in terms of population, but it's a huge land. If you look at Kazakhstan alone, who is the largest country in Central Asia, the population is just 80 million, while the most populated country is Uzbekistan. As you see in the picture here in the shared PPT, the future is still linked to tourist, for example, opportunity, like the picture is Samarkand. It was at the core of the Silk Road, but then you can see the challenge. The challenge, the other picture that you see is the Aral Lake, and the lake has been progressively shrinking due to changing in climate condition. So they share this challenge, and if we go back to the map, you can see that also in the southern part of Central Asia, there is a proximity with Afghanistan, with Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, sharing part of their border and sharing a looming terrorist threat from Afghanistan in terms of returning foreign fighters from the Middle East, North Africa, through Afghanistan. And this looming terrorist threat is still part of the threat matrix to the region. Again, then one of the questions that you can start to have is say, okay, we are talking about China now, we are talking about Russia, but again, what the link with the Middle East? Historically speaking, Central Asia in pre-Islamic time had a very strong influence from the Persian, Iranian language in several areas, then from Turkic language, and if you see especially in Turkmenistan, in Tajikistan, the linguistic influence from Turkey is very strong. But again, the entire historical renaissance of the region is still neglected, because some of the most important thinkers, like Ibn Sina, a native of Bukhara, better known in the West with the vulgarization of his name in Avicenna, was a polymath. He was well versed in advanced mathematics, in poetry, in literature, but also in medicine. And his canon, the canon, was the basic of all the Middle Age and Renaissance texts in Europe. From Abyssinia, we can move to the picture on the left with Timur, and on the top we have Ulugh Beg, who was called the astronomer king. Ulugh Beg, native from the area of Samarkand, was not one of the last Timurid king, but he's also a well-versed mathematician, and the advancement in astronomical calculation during the time of Ulugh Beg were extremely important. You have to recall that at the time the caravan were moving from China across Eurasia, and being able to pinpoint at night on a map the exact position was only possible due to the advance in mathematical calculations, spherical mathematics, that Ulugh Beg promoted in the area of what is now modern Uzbekistan. Mostly in the text, all these polymath moving from Abyssinia, Farghani, Khazari, and Ulugh Beg himself are referenced as Arab, but at the time they are Central Asian. Just the fact that as now Russian is the lingua franca of Central Asia, at the time Arabic was the main language for scientists, for polymath, and for astronomer, and even for artists. But now we can move a little bit looking at the broader context in what is the economic development of Central Asia, why it's going to be important in terms of cooperation and relationship with ASEAN. And of course, as mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, I'm going to give just a very broad picture of what are the trend, the challenges that Central Asia is going to face. But during the Q&A, feel free to jump in and to ask very specific questions, and I will try my best to provide an answer. Kazakhstan is the most rich country in Central Asia, thanks to the fact that it's blessed by huge reserve of hydrocarbons, mostly it's oil, but also the world's biggest reserve in uranium and plutonium. So thanks to the fact that there are from day one very important income deriving from natural resource use and sell to country, mostly to China, Europe, and to Europe. Kazakhstan is the most developed country in Central Asian economy, and geographically is the largest one. Beside the extensive hydrocarbon reserve, has been one of the most successful countries in Central Asia in attracting foreign investment, not only related to resource extraction, but also in investment on transportation and infrastructure. And this is mainly from China and is linked, as I just mentioned, to the Belt and Road Initiative. According to the World Bank, in Central Asia, Kazakhstan is the most easy country to doing business with, but we don't have to forget that is mostly referred to main city that is Almaty and to the capital Nur Sultan. If you look at maps that are a little bit older than a few years, you will not be able to find the capital Nur Sultan because it just changed name recently when the father of the nation, President Nur Sultan Nazarbayev, shifted his power stance in favor of the new president Tokayev. And then Tokayev named the new the capital Astana with the name of the father of the nation. As you see, having as a father of the nation a strong man that was in power during the Soviet time is not just a specificity of Kazakhstan, but also is a recurring theme in all the other Central Asian countries. But then, having said that, the government in Kazakhstan in the last 15 years has made a very strong effort in attracting investment, not only from China, but also from Japan, from Korea, from South Korea, for a very historical reason that an important part of the population originated not only from Russia. There are several, especially in the northeast of the country, there is a Russian, ethnic Russian enclave, but also from South Korea. Then the efforts were not only related to developing extraction sector, but also to develop local enterprise with the help of European Union, but also Singapore played and is playing nowadays a very important part in the education sector with NUS LKY school partnership with Nazarbayev University. Having said that, Kazakhstan has been hit badly in 2014 with the collapse of the oil prices, and COVID-19 definitely is not going to help the country reform. It's even going to increase a drop in the GDP for the next year. According to the IMF, with the recent report, probably we are looking at 4 to 5% drop in the GDP. And in this respect, the economic outlook still present several risks, but the government has acted quite fast in trying to cope with this risk. Therefore, political stability still remains quite high in Kazakhstan. And if you still go back just less than a decade and you look at analysts, especially in the West, looking at transition of power in Central Asia, they were looking basically at problems, even riot or revolt, when it was going to be a time for the father of the nation to step down. In Kazakhstan, it didn't happen. It was a smoothless transition from Nazarbayev to Tokayev. Same in Uzbekistan, from Islam Karimov to the new president. And then the issue about government risk and political stability are more related in Central Asia to Tajikistan, that still have Rahman as a strong man, but to Kyrgyzstan, that for the third time witnessed riot during the election. And we are just talking a couple of weeks ago. President Nazarbayev was very successful in balancing relation. We are not talking about balancing relation between the United States and China, as everybody are struggling to do it nowadays, but it's balancing relation between Russia and China that are both present on the border of Kazakhstan and with different power. Russian soft power, Chinese economic diplomacy, and Russian military might are still very present in the country and all over Central Asia. From Kazakhstan, we can move to the Kyrgyz Republic. Kyrgyzstan has been trying hard to change the Stan part of the name of the country into Kyrgyz Republic. Stan for all these countries reminiscence of the Persian time, and in Persian just means the land of. Land of population that, with exception of Uzbekistan, with center like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Chiva, that were metropolis at the time, very rich in terms of culture, of civilization. Most of the other part of the country were related to nomadic tribe that were moving with the herd, and they were very active, military speaking, against all kind of invader. Only the advent of gunpowder changed the fear for sedentary population against the nomadic and very aggressive tribe. But backing back to nowadays and talking about the Kyrgyz Republic, we can see a picture that is completely different from the one depicted in Kazakhstan. Kyrgyz economy is quite small, considering also the population is quite small, and the region is not blessed like Kazakhstan by natural resources. It just have a very limited natural resources, mostly related to the extraction of gold. And most of these mines now are under Chinese management. The Kyrgyz Republic is very dependent on the remittance from the Kyrgyz migrant worker, mostly in Moscow and in Russia. So you can already figure it out that COVID-19 and the problem with worker movement is going to affect very badly the economic outlook of the Kyrgyz Republic. According to the World Bank, ease of doing business, if I recall correct, a couple of years ago, Kyrgyzstan was not ranking very well. The main problem were not related to corruption, but also to a very bureaucratic and ambiguous process to access to the credit system, to repatriate profit, and even for energy for the company they inserted there who are going to have a startup in the region. As I said just a few minutes before, Kyrgyz Republic with Tajikistan are probably the most prone country to relatively conflict-prone country in Central Asia. The risk that affect the two countries are greater compared to the other three countries, and they related to several intra-regional conflict that can be ignited by water dispute, by border dispute, and also by religious extremism, separatism. And we don't have to forget, and it's almost done, the role of narcotic smuggling. From Afghanistan to Russia, to Europe, 80% of the Afghan opium route moved through Tajikistan and in some part to Kyrgyzstan. So in this respect, the narco mafia in the area, especially on the border area, are a severe and mostly underlooked constraint to the development of the Kyrgyz Republic and Tajikistan. And then, of course, poverty, underemployment, and we have to say all these countries have a high percentage of young population. Then if you have underemployed, unemployed young population that are not able to access proper university or even high school, then this can facilitate recruitment for separatist and extremist organization. Moving from Kyrgyz to Tajikistan, we can see that again we have a country that struggles with poverty and instability, but contrary to Kyrgyz Republic, the strong man from the Soviet Union is still there, and I'm referring to President Rahmon. And since 1994, he has a very strong grip on power of the country, and he restored a modicum of stability and control. Country still like Kyrgyz Republic has a huge amount of migrant worker, and this increased the economic dependency with Russia. But Russia also helped in addressing security challenge with the border with Afghanistan. Both countries, Kyrgyz and Tajik, have a Russian military base in the area. And then if we look at the main foreign investor, again, the story is very similar to the other four Central Asian countries. We are looking at Russia, Kazakhstan, increasing Uzbekistan, but of course China as the main driver for economic investment. But we don't have to forget United Kingdom, European Union, and even the United States. And in the past 3 years, also China has increased something that is quite strange to the Chinese stance outside China, and is military to military training and the transfer of military equipment. But mostly this equipment is related to border control. In terms of easy to do business, Tajikistan is still considered not an easy place to do business. And basically, if any company want to have a modicum of success, need to be very dependent on the relation with the local senior level government official. Let's say that regulation is still complicated. Most of the time is unclear. And then a recent research carried on, if I recall correct, by the US government in the East to do business in the country, underlined that there are more than 200 different strategic development plans in order to attract business. And another problem is the business skill of the young population and on the workforce. Having said that, Tajikistan, with some other countries in Central Asia, suffers severely for environmental and climate challenge, not only to the access of water, but to the pollution due to chemical and irrigation to increase agricultural production. Tajikistan, and I will talk a little bit later, or maybe we can talk now about Uzbekistan, during the Soviet time and the Soviet economic development were tasked to basically produce all the cotton for the entire Soviet Union. Uzbek cotton with the Egyptian is still considered one of the best cotton in the world, but at the time, cotton was not mechanized. It was not a mechanized agriculture. So when it was time for the harvest, basically not only people devoted to agricultural job, but even university students and the university professor were called to the harvest, and all the schools in the country were closed just because all the able hand, no matter what age, had to harvest the cotton. Things, especially with the new president, are changing and are changing very fast. But then all the strain in using irrigation and chemical in producing cotton from the time of the Soviet era up to now are still creating several problems for the soil salinization and overall desertification. Deforestation, if we look at environmental challenge and climate challenge, also is a cause of concern in Tajikistan. And then, of course, in all these countries, especially in Tajikistan, there is a very limited reach on NGO and reporting in order to have updated data and a better picture on the climate change and the problem related to the environmental degradation. We can see that in the country, effect of poverty played quite badly, especially favoring recruitment from extremist organization. Kol Jihad is not only affected in Tajikistan, the poorest area of the population, but there was a case that was quite famous, if I recall correct, it was in 2015, that a colonel from the Tajik Special Forces swapped his allegiance and then moved to Syria with some of his forces fighting for ISIS. And then, as I mentioned before, narcotic smuggling is still a present danger at all levels, because it creates opportunity for corruption and it creates constraint in proper economic development. Tajikistan is the primary transit country for Afghan narcotic smuggling, and from that area, from the Kunduz province, it reached Russia and the European market. In this respect, both the European Union, the United States, and even Russia helped or are helping Tajikistan border force in fighting narcotic smuggling. The late come in this fight is China with military equipment transfer. But then we are talking about a huge border, as you noticed in the map before, very long border between Tajikistan and Afghanistan, and mostly is mountainous regions that are very difficult to control and to patrol. Russia is present with a military base, but nevertheless, in 2018, ISIS claimed a lone wolf attack against American tourists in the area and killing with American and Western tourists. They were cycling across Central Asia. Moving from Tajikistan to Turkmenistan, we can start to say that Turkmenistan is a big challenge for researchers. First and foremost, for the lack of data. It's very difficult to have updated data from all kinds of data, from the population, from the security, from the economic standpoint. So basically, Turkmenistan, even more than Kazakhstan, is blessed by abundant natural resource. Probably the economic rests on the sales of gas and oil, and Turkmenistan have the world's fourth largest gas reserve in the world. But again, the same as Kazakhstan, the fall of hydrocarbon price in 2014 and the compounded negative effect of COVID-19 nowadays is going to create constraint for Turkmenistan. Having said that, just a few months ago, if I recall correct, Turkmenistan president just announced the intent to build a new city in the country for the total figure of 1.5 billion US dollar. Turkmenistan have a foreign policy of neutrality that in some respect considerably narrow down any possibility for greater international cooperation or even regional integration. So we are not sure if there is an increase of security threat from ISIS and Al-Qaeda from Afghanistan. Up to now, a statement from the Turkmen government says that security is not an issue in the area. But then we can see that, again, lack of reliable data is so severe that organizations like the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund are not even trying to give an outlook on the country possible development. What we know at official level is that the country is looking at a development plan that is started in 2018 and is going through 2024. And the government is wishing to attract more investment in energy resource exploitation that now basically is just between Turkmenistan and China, who is the main buyer of Turkmen gas, while just a decade before it was Russia with Gazprom. Having said that, Turkmenistan of look compared to Kyrgyzstan or even to Tajikistan look quite stable, and there has been already a shift of power from the father of the nation, and now I just use this term because it was the one that is still used to talk about the former president Niyazov, that was called in his country Turkmenbashi, father of the nation. The new president, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, I apologize for my pronunciation, is called Arkadag, who is the protector of the nation. And then, beside the fact that the fall in the gas price are going to severe constrain the development, there are still no record of problem to the foreign investment and challenge to the overall social stability. But then again, the absence of reliable macroeconomic data are not going to allow us any kind of analysis in the area. And the new project of 1.5 billion for the building of the new city in the Hal province, that not by chance the governor of the province is the son of Arkadag, of the president, then is going to raise some question about the possibility in having that kind of funding. Having said that, we can move from this very brief economic analysis to Uzbekistan, who is an extremely promising country among all Central Asian countries. It didn't have the chance to have natural resources like Turkmenistan or Kazakhstan, but following the shift of power from the Uzbek father of the nation, who was President Islam Karimov, and he died in 2016. The new president, Mirziyoyev, is leading a very ambitious program of economic development that is focused on the younger part of the Uzbek population. Education, political reform, government are still very promising. The currency, the tenge, has been liberalized in 2017. There was a big devaluation, some critics and some problem, but then it opened the economy to broader trade and investment, not only from Russia and China. Business environment, a better business environment is underscored as the main priority for the Uzbek government, and the World Bank recognized it in the latest Ease of Doing Business report in 2019. In this respect, Uzbek leadership is still very keen in attracting foreign investment, but up to now we see that the number of and the scope and scale of this investment is still very limited. An important part is played by the local community that have a very strong ethnic relationship with South Korea. And the country established the Special Economic Development Zone with the help of China. And up to now, COVID definitely is going to reduce the scope and the size of this economic zone and program. But I do believe that still Uzbekistan is on the path of very fast development. But then again, there are security challenges. Islamic extremist movement like IMU, Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, are still active. Not in Central Asia, but on the fringe, moving from Middle East, North Africa through Afghanistan. And there was a greater number of Uzbek foreign fighters fighting for ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And this security challenge, again, are still looming as a possible terrorist threat. As mentioned before, the problem of legacy of cotton still affect nowadays economic development in Uzbekistan, especially if we look at the exploitation of water resource. And water resource create easily border conflict between Central Asian countries, and are up to now a very big problematic hindrance in regionalization, to have a common economic market in the region. UN, especially UNDP, has been very active with several other initiatives with Multilateral Development Bank, from the European Bank of Reconstruction Development, Asia Development Bank with CAREC initiative, AIB, Islamic Development Bank, and so on. And then last but not least, Uzbekistan in Tashkent is the site for the regional anti-terrorism structure organization that has been established under the chapter of the SCO with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So as I said before, IMU was a threat, now is still reduced, but it's still a threat. And there are still nowadays skirmishes between border forces in Kyrgyz and Tajik Republic with IMU and Uzbek fighter. And this group has still been quite active in the Middle East. Before I leave the floor to the Q&A, I just want to give you some of the broader perception. One of the broad perception about Central Asia is energy. You can see from the map the corridor that cross all Central Asia. Don't look only the east-west perspective, but also focus on the north-south perspective that is going to witness an increasing number of projects that are going to link Pakistan through Afghanistan with the port of Gwadar, Chabahar in Iran, and so on. And this is one of the part of the story of Central Asia nowadays, and is rooted in energy and energy corridor. Another part of the story is the Belt and Road Initiative. As I mentioned before, for the first time, the Belt and Road Initiative was presented at the Nazarbayev University by President Xi Jinping in 2013. And you can see across a notable part of Central Asia, moving goods via railway from China to Duisburg, Uch, and Rotterdam in the European Union. There are still some quite interesting historical note in the transportation is the fact that when the rail convoy are moved between China and Russia, they have to change the carriage because there is a different in sides, because still from the time of the Tsar, there was this fear, yellow peril or xenophobia that China was going to invade, and so denying the same track to the Chinese train, armored train, was one of the way to stop a possible China invasion in that area. Moving from the Silk Road economic belt, that is the land part of the Belt and Road Initiative, we can look at the fact that most of the narrative on Central Asia is related to Russia military and security footprint in the region, and China economic diplomacy. In my personal opinion, it's quite naive approach. Definitely China is one of the leading economic investor and trade partner, but we don't have to forget that also Russia, with the custom union, is a very important partner for the economy. Kyrgyz, Tajik, and other Central Asian migrant workers working in Moscow and Russia are still an important component of their own country economic development. And then, of course, in security terms, China is slowly increasing bilateral security cooperation with countries in Central Asia that share border and common problem with China. Definitely Russia, not only due to the fact that have several military bases in the area, is quite important, but all these countries are part of the former Soviet bloc. And having said that, they share material, all the military hardware, training, and all official at higher level are still trained in Russia. So Russian soft power also is very important because the lingua franca is Russian all over the Central Asia. Now it's changing, especially if we move to Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and so on. But if we still in Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan, the use of Russian language and all Russian soft power that come with that, it's quite important. And then I would like to finish and give the floor to the Q&A, just looking at the challenge that Central Asia is going to face in the years to come. As you can see, national, as mentioned before, national identity, internal stability, border and water dispute are going to create additional regional integration problem. Then we have the so-called three evils of terrorism, separatism, religious extremism, narcotic smuggling, but then we have multiple economic club and security club. I just put some logo, and you can see the SCO on the top, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the CSTO, who is the Collective Security and Trade Organization. Then you have the one in the bottom, who is the EAEU, who is the Eurasian Economic Union. that not only include Central Asia, but Russia, Belarus, and so on. Then you have CAREC, that is an initiative sponsored by the Asian Development Bank. And at the end, you have the ECO, who is the Economic Cooperation Organization that has been spearheaded a while ago from Turkey, Iran, and Pakistan with Central Asian country. Definitely, if you like Central Asia and look at acronyms, you can just take a look at this slide. I'm not going to comment it, but these are all the competing, complementing, overlapping economic and security organizations that are mostly present up to now in Central Asia. And I would like just to end here and to leave the floor to your question and answer. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Dr. Arduino, for that very interesting and very comprehensive presentation. We'll go to the question and answer now. Please indicate if you want to ask a question by clicking the raise hand button. I don't see anyone. If I could just ask a question on the alphabet soup of that you just flashed on the screen. There's this whole suite of multilateral kind of intra-regional fora that Central Asia has. I mean, to what extent have these contributed to the stability and facilitating the kind of prosperity that the region is trying so hard to get towards? And why has Central Asian kind of like regionalism proven so elusive?
Thank you, Tiana. Then we start with a difficult question. Let's start with the end of the question. Why has been proven so elusive? I've been travel intensively in the region, and now logistic integration and networking is getting better by the day. But at the time, and I'm talking a decade ago, just moving from the People's Republic of China to Kazakhstan, and then from Kazakhstan to Tajikistan was easier to move after having flight to Urumqi, spending a long time in the area, moving to Kazakhstan, and then the option was go back to China, and from Beijing get another plane, go to Dubai, or even what I was more used to do was going to Seoul in Korea, increasing the length of the flight, but to get a better connection. So still block between the regional integration in terms of transportation at the time were incredibly problematic in moving not only goods, but in moving people. Now it's getting better by the day. Regional integration still has been discussed, but there are still competing problems that are related not only to border dispute, that several disputes are already there, but also to water management. Because some countries have the water that other countries need for agricultural use or for steel smelter and for industrialization. And this water management is still creating severe problem. As you mentioned before, among the alphabet soup, one of the organizations that truly helped regional integration started as the Shanghai Five, and then evolved into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Beside the name, the SCO is headquartered in Beijing, and it encompasses Central Asian country with Russia, China, is spearheaded by China, and recently have also included India and Pakistan, and probably in the near future, Iran and other members will be there, where Afghanistan, for example, is an observer. So SCO, first and foremost, promoted the integration and the border, the normalization of the border dispute between China and Russia, but also in some part in the area in Central Asia. CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, is not only looking at Central Asia, but we are talking about Belarus and Armenia. And especially now, the role of Russia leading this military organization with the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh that is just at the border of Central Asia, involving Armenia and Azerbaijan, is quite interesting. Then Vladimir Putin, he also pushed for not only military integration, but also economic integration with the Eurasian Economic Union, and that helped the common market between Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. And then there are initiatives that, in my opinion, are very efficient and effective from multilateral development bank that are focusing on very specific projects in terms of increasing capabilities, learning among the younger population, and I'm referring to CAREC, spearheaded by ADB, but also to the program by UNDP, IMF, World Bank, and Islamic Development Bank. Even the Economic Cooperation Organization with Pakistan, Iran, and Turkey is trying to improve the regional economic stance, as well as the Islamic Organization and the Islamic Development Bank.
Thanks, Alex. Okay, I have a question from Miss Anahita. Miss Anahita, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello. And actually, I should be grateful to the Middle East Institute regular events that it was very, very useful and informative. Each session was very nice, and especially I should be grateful to Dr. Alex, and it was actually very, very informative and very useful speech here about the Central Asia. But as you, I am from Iran, and as Iran also these days are in the focal points of the Middle East, especially during to the political shifts, dramatic actually political shifts in the Middle East. I want to ask whether, according to the Iran's friendship with Russia and China, Dr. Alex, what's your idea about increasing Iran's influence in the Central Asia? Can we imagine this kind of, increasing the influence of Iran there? Because there is some skepticism about the Iran's influence also in the Central Asia. I would be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I feel a bit difficult talking about Iran because here at MEI we have the utmost expert on Iran in the area, that is Dr. Shuja, but I will try my best in address the problem. First and foremost, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, Iran was a very important part in the development of Central Asia in pre-Islamic time, and Iranian influence not only in terms of linguistic influence, but in architecture. It's still very visible nowadays. I've been traveling just last year from Bukhara to Samarkand, and from the madrasa to the caravanserai, they are mostly based on Iranian pattern because you see animal, flowers, and so on. So some part of the influence is still there. If Iran is going to be able to use this past influence to promote new, let's say, new Iranian soft power, it still have to be said, because from a religious point of view, Shiism is still considered a very minority of Islam religion in all Central Asia. But also we have to talk about an Islam that is mediated, has been strongly influenced by the Soviet time. It was a time in which it was forbidden, and then it moved borderline to neglected and accepted. And nowadays, you still have this, let's say, problematic approach in the role of Islam, and especially I'm referring to political Islam. For example, in 2011, when the Arab Spring were moving quite fast, right, rapid like a fire in North Africa and Middle East, several countries in Eurasia were not even mentioning the trend, but Central Asian countries were showing on daily basis the unrest that Arab Spring were creating in several countries, from Egypt to other North African and in the Middle East, showcasing that it was something that could happen in Central Asia if they are not careful to that. Going back not to Arab Spring, but to the role of Iran, I think that we are going to see an increasing role the day Iran is going to be a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Iran is already there as an observer. There's been a lot of talk recently, but there is still not a fixed date to see Iran as a part of the organization. And then, of course, if we look at the North-South axis, that involve a strong Chinese-sponsored economic infrastructure development, then there is the port of Chabahar, the railway connection, and in the other part with Pakistan, the other area, border area that are connecting Iranian oil to not only China, but to all Asia. We are already witnessing a fact that Middle East is slowly pivoting to Asia. And that's already a fact. Then we have to say how Iran is going to be able to connect with Central Asia, especially now that all the entire area, and especially Iran, is economically affected by the pandemic, and the country has been hit extremely hard. And it was already quite weak due to the fact of the economic sanction. So I hope I answered, I'm sure only partially, your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor. Okay, I have Ms. Inkar Aitkuzina. Could you unmute yourself? Go ahead.
Hello. Hi, Prof. Alex. I have a question about the identity politics. So you mentioned the influence of growing influence of China in the region, but we've also seen some backlash against this influence. So, for example, in 2016 in Kazakhstan, I'm from Kazakhstan, we had a land reform protests against Chinese investors. And this year in February, we've seen similar protests in Kyrgyzstan at Narin, where a lot of people were protesting against Chinese investments, and the government has to revert the projects. So what do you think are the other challenges for China in terms of expanding economically to the region, and how China is going to deal with the identity backlash that's happening there?
Inkar, thank you very much for the not easy at all question. I will respond to that looking at 2 points. First is a problem that China has along all the Belt and Road Initiative. Backlash with local population, local worker, and even local government. And this is not only a problem of Kazakhstan, is not a problem of Central Asia, is an overall problem of the Belt and Road Initiative, especially to the fact that at the beginning, and now Beijing is starting to address the problem, but at the beginning, all the investment were devolved to Chinese company that were using Chinese material, Chinese worker, and even Chinese imported food. So the local population were perceiving the Chinese investment like just an exploitation, creating even environmental damage and degradation. Now is no more the case, as Beijing is taking into consideration this point, but then in several areas still there is this perception. Then I'm moving from the broad problem of the BRI to specific Central Asia, and even more specific to Kazakhstan. And I'm talking about previous perception of China. What I mentioned before, the yellow peril of xenophobia. This fear of Chinese with a huge population occupying the land that normally is, it was just used by nomadic tribes. And then you have this huge amount of Chinese settlers that are going to conquer the land and stay there. And I'm not talking at a problem that is related to today. I'm talking about a problem that was perceived as a problem during the time of the Tsar, and even the Soviet propaganda was increasing this Chinese fear among all the Central Asian population, having the Qin dynasty empire moving a huge amount of his people in the uninhabited land of Central Asia and occupying them for use. So this use and sale of land to Chinese is still ingrained preoccupation in the DNA of Central Asian population, especially in area like Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan. At the beginning, especially looking at the investment in the energy, natural gas resource sector and in Kazakhstan, and the clash that there's been between Chinese worker and local worker were quite complicated, and it involved armed police quelling the protest in the area. Not only in Kazakhstan, also in Uzbekistan, even in Tajikistan. I recall in Kyrgyzstan, one of the biggest fight between the local population, the local worker and the Chinese was ignited by the fact that the Chinese truck hit a cow and killed the cow. And then the person who was the owner went to ask a compensation, but arrived to the working place or Chinese working place with a lot of friends, and then there was a fight, and then it spiraled down and the police had to intervene. And then this one of the problem that, as I mentioned, is only not related to China and Central Asia, but is overall Belt and Road Initiative in other areas, especially in Africa, for example, and so on. I do believe that in Central Asia, the problem is getting solved quite easily compared to the other part, due to the fact that Central Asia still is a laboratory test of the direction of the Belt and Road, because Belt and Road started in Central Asia. So all the maturity of the blueprint project that in several areas are still undergoing in Central Asia are already reality. So we are looking at connection, rail network, improved regional connection, and these are just the positive outcome that we see now. But still several of these problems between local worker and the Chinese worker need to be addressed, let's say, with more corporate social responsibility management tool that have been done up to now. And thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arduino. I have a question from Ms. Ng Tun Lee. She's asked, please could you comment on the extent of cooperation between Singapore and the ASEAN countries with the Central Asian states?
Yes, this cooperation, for example, we are witnessing in the latest years an increased cooperation and sale of agricultural product from Central Asia to Asian. And interestingly, one of the most active countries in Asian is Vietnam in importing and exporting agricultural product. But then again, for the years to come, COVID or not COVID, in my personal opinion, Singapore, especially in the education and in the financial sector, is at the forefront of the cooperation between Asian and Central Asia. As I mentioned before, LKY and US University is already working very well in Kazakhstan, supporting Nazarbayev University. But Kazakhstan alone has this ambition in becoming the financial center of all Central Asia, and support not only from the city, and by the city I mean London, it's also interesting to see it from Singapore, that is still considering a leading financial hub, not only for Southeast Asia, but for all over the world. And Singapore capabilities, Singapore training, Singapore e-learning, especially in a time of COVID, in my personal opinion, are going to play extremely well with the need of the Central Asian country. And then we have to say, higher level of cooperation that can be investment from Temasek, from Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund in the region, could be a balancer, not only between China and Russia, but an overall, let's say, balancer in terms of North-South cooperation between Eurasia and Asia. So I hope I answered your question. One thing I want just to add is that in Singapore, people probably don't realize that one of the model that is always quoted by Central Asian country, especially by Kazakhstan, is the Lee Kuan Yew model. They call it the Singapore model. Develop as a country in between great power and in just one generation becoming a leading economy. So if you just look at the media in Russian language in Central Asia, especially Kazakhstan, you are going to notice a lot of reference, not during the diplomatic exchange between Singapore diplomats and Singapore president visit to Kazakhstan, but also in the overall media when there is a talk about small medium enterprise development, about financial sector development, about an overall development that is going to balance pressure or very big neighbor. Singapore model is always quoted as one of the leading way. So I do believe that Singapore have the chance, let's say, to use this fact that Central Asia is looking very positively, having this soft power in economical term, and to use it to increase the economic cooperation with overall Central Asia.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, there seems to be a lot of synergies between Kazakhstan and Singapore. But what about the other Central Asian countries? I mean, Kazakhstan has a fairly large Singaporean presence, but how about the other states? What do they have to offer Singapore, and vice versa? You spoke about the Singapore model, but aside from that.
Beside the Singapore model, I still do believe that Uzbekistan, being the largest in terms of population country in Central Asia with 33 million population, and mostly is young population below 35 years old, is on a path of economic development, economic opening, and economic transformation. And this can play very well in terms of absorbing high-level services that can be offered by Singaporean companies and by even cooperation at very high government level. If we are looking at Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, I don't see many cooperation chance if we just look at business-to-business cooperation. Turkmenistan, as I mentioned before, beside energy cooperation that can be, of course, always interesting in terms of gas supply and so on, is the fact that there are no any kind of macroeconomic data that are allowing us to make any kind of prediction about future cooperation and so on. Having said that, in terms just of shipment of goods, and by shipment of goods, especially agricultural product and so on, then the biggest problem, as usual, for landlocked country comes to the fact that the cost involving shipment by land are far superior than the one by sea. But then now with the increasing presence of Belt and Road Initiative and interconnection between Southeast Asia with Eurasia, these prices are going to be reduced. We don't have to forget one thing that I did not mention before, is the climate. Central Asia, most of the Central Asian countries, especially Kazakhstan, in winter are extremely cold. We are talking about -40, -45 even. So when there is shipment of goods between countries during the time, then there is an even additional cost because you need insulated transportation with the proper air conditioning. For example, one of the first batch shipment from Hewlett-Packard in Europe to Chinese special development zone in Chongqing were chipset for printer, and they forgot winter. So in summer, everything was running very smoothly, but during winter, with the -40 in the carriage, most of the chip, they just exploded for the cold. So these are several issues that still we have to take into consideration. If even we are in 2020, climate is still an issue to take into consideration.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask you, I mean, there are opportunities for Singapore companies and I think there's growing interest from Singapore businesses, especially from the SME side. But I mean, aside from the opportunities, we also look at risks as well. So one of the, I guess, as promising as these frontier markets are, and they're often, there are a lot of challenges in terms of political risk, cultural differences, and I guess, seasonal. A Singapore company would be thrown as well with, they'll never think about the minus 40-degree winter. Yeah. Okay. There are no questions at the moment. Maybe I can ask one more. You spoke about the Soviet kind of legacy in the Central Asian states, but the Central Asian states also have a very young population, and I think the generation that is kind of coming of age now is a lot of them were born after 1991, and so has that meant that the sort of affinity to the Soviet Union, the kind of ties that they have, that their parents' generation might have had, is eroding, and how has that shaped, how has that affected how the populations view these great powers' involvement in their countries?
That's a very interesting question, and I can answer with a very personal perspective. Not only have been traveling intensively in the region, but I've been teaching at the Ablaykhan University in Almaty in Kazakhstan for a while. So I had the chance to talk on daily basis with master degree student. And it's extremely interesting because this new generation has great expectation for the future. With less well-defined path to decide what they want to do when they grow up. Let me be more explicit. If they look back, they have parents who their only option was a Soviet economic model of 5-year economic development plan working for the state. And for them, there is the option to still work for the state or to start to be a businessman. And they have the Chinese option. China is offering this kind of option in trading, in opportunity. And then there's this mostly all these people that I met, they're very talented, young students that they look at the future with a lot of hope. Because the country are young, they born no more in the Soviet. So the soft power of Russia is still there, to the fact that they prefer mostly to communicate with Russian language, not even with their local Kazakh, Uzbek language, but then they all speak in English, and because it's granted that you need to speak in English. So they already start from very young talking with 3 languages, but if they want to do business, they need to speak Chinese. So we are talking about Russian, English, Chinese, and it opened your mind having the chance to speak several different languages to move in the area. And you can see that, for example, Kazakhstan started several years ago, thanks to the fact that there is a new wealth coming from oil, to have an education program to send students abroad. It's called Bolashak Future. And all the students, after finishing their program abroad, most of them, they were going back, looking at a good position in the government or even in becoming a successful businessman. Of course, there are a lot of questions if there is competing soft power from the Chinese economic soft power, the Russian one, but definitely we are not talking about a Soviet soft power in the region. Albeit the fact that there is some nationalism, especially in a country like the Kyrgyz Republic, with the new president looking more at a populistic, nationalistic approach. But we are talking about a president that has been elected 14 days ago. So I do believe, even for me, it's a little bit early to make any kind of prediction. But having said that, this young population is really the future of Central Asia, and they see now the possibility to travel, to move, and to cooperate with their peers abroad. And I do believe that definitely they are going to develop the country in something. When I was in Tashkent not long ago, and I had a meeting at vice minister level, I was surprised at how everybody was so young, compared to the usual age that we have in Europe for a minister, for example. And it was one of the first surprise. And I'm sure that the local population in this respect, matching all this kind competing soft power is going to find a proper Central Asian, Eurasian solution to their own country. If COVID-19 is going to affect more severely Central Asia, and it's a big if, then this definitely is going to create a huge problem, especially for the younger. I'm not talking about the usual problem of unemployment. I'm talking about the fact that now high school, but even university, they don't have enough broadband capacity to offer e-learning service. So most of the students have any chance to talk with their teacher, to have Zoom call like we are doing now. And then all the project to have an economic diversification that is moving out from oil exporting to, for example, tourism and so on is going to be heavily affected. And this can be the real problem for this younger generation. So I do sincerely hope to don't have any kind of lost generation for the next 2-3 years during to the constraint by COVID-19 pandemic.
Thanks, Alex, for that very comprehensive answer. Asif has a question. Asif, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Teti, for this opportunity. Alex, I have met very few people who could pronounce these 5 names of Central Asian countries. I have remembered it like saying KKTTU, something like that, if you have a shortcut. So on a serious note, my question to you was, because imagine, a diplomat giving a press briefing. It would have been so embarrassing to miss who is who, Has it been a cause of engagement, lack of engagement of Central Asian countries from outside world? That is my first serious question. And they say, you being a diplomat, if there is actually a reality in that. The second question is, you had mentioned about Central Asia's role in North-South connectivity. And precisely in terms of India's effort in its participation in international North-South corridor. What is the role of Central Asia? What exactly is the India, level of inroads or success in that realm? These are the 2 questions, if you could answer. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you very much, Aziz. I was hoping that you jump in before with the question on Iran, the fact that you are the expert in the area. I will try to put your 2 parts of the question together and starting with the latter one. India, and of course, for a matter of time and space, I didn't look at the broader picture in cooperation with other countries. As I mentioned, South Korea, Japan, but also India, in some respect, Iran, and especially Turkey. Has started to getting involved with Central Asia. India in the automotive sector, for example, and in the other area has been doing cooperation with Uzbekistan, if I recall correct. We had even the United States have a General Motors plant in Uzbekistan, and the engineer trained in Tashkent come from the Polytechnic of Torino, who is a university from the city where I come from, who has been more than 10 years operating in Tashkent. And just recently also from Torino, there is the Juventus Football Club that just opened the training school for all the footballers, not only in Uzbekistan, but in Central Asia. Back to India, India have an interesting soft power in Central Asia and in the area, but has been, and let's call it cyclical, with up and down related to the economic situation, India economic situation, and to the willingness to devote more resources in the connectivity. For example, Chabahar port that has been seen attached a great importance from India in cooperation with Iran and linking with the corridor, competing with Qatar port, is having now some discussion and issue related to the renewal of the contract, not only on the port, but to the railway connection with the port and the other area in Iran. So India, and some well as Turkey, has been, let's say, oscillating in the pattern of cooperation with Central Asia, but is still considered a player in the area. While, for example, European country neglected in the early 90s interest to greater cooperation with Central Asia. It's been increased in the latest 90s, especially with multilateral development bank like the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. But the real interest, for example, from the West on Central Asia arrived after September 11, when Central Asian country become a point of insertion and later on in this year of exfiltration of military material that were helping ISAF and the US-led military intervention in Afghanistan. So as the time is running out, I hope I answered your question, and thank you for asking it.
Thanks, Dr. Arduino. I thought maybe we'll end off with a question on US-China, because we haven't really talked about the US yet. There are two US military bases in the Central Asian region, including this huge one in K2. The SEO has been campaigning for their removal. Can you give your take on how the US-China strategic rivalry would play out in this region?
In terms of military base, I say that it's quite interesting if we see how Russia and US military bases play out during the Afghan conflict. Before the American intervention and before I am related to the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan in the 70s and the support to the local Mujahideen by Saudi and by the US. And then it evolved in the competition for basing between Russia and USA during ISAF and the fight led by the United States. In this respect, for the weak economy of the country that are hosting the bases, the rent alone of a military base, it's a very important part of the national budget. Having said that, the country were increasing the rent, pitching one country against the other. With the dwindling of American military presence in Afghanistan, the use of these bases is going to be more related to support to special forces and drone strike capabilities and to having a footprint in the region. But since the time of President Barack Obama, there has been a decrease, a notable decrease interest in overall Central Asia, not only in economical, geostrategical term and in military term. US aid was quite active at the beginning. General Motors, for example, like spearheaded investment in Uzbekistan, but then after several years closed the entire production, giving it to Daewoo and to other automotive players. Having said that, the Chinese military presence there, we just have a hint of a military base in Tajikistan that it's borderline to the Afghan border, and the transfer of military equipment for border control. But I don't see any kind of competition like the US-Russia competition in Chinese military base competition with Russia in the area. US tried a while ago to compete with the Belt and Road Initiative, trying to have a new Silk Road initiative in the area, but the amount of funds that were devoted to the initiative were a very, very narrow margin, small compared to the Chinese one. And as I mentioned before, still Central Asia is quite interesting because it's where it's basically started, the Belt and Road Initiative, and it's where we can start to see what are the effects, what are the outcomes, and most important, what are the problems that probably are going to affect several other countries that are working with China along the Belt and Road Initiative.
Thank you, Dr. Arduino, for that. Well, it looks like there are no more questions. So let me thank Dr. Arduino for a really insightful discussion and to our audience for all their questions. We've come to the end of our 101 series for this year. We started off the first lecture in August by, I guess, asking the question, why does the Middle East matter for us in Singapore? So just a couple of takeaways. I guess the first point that we hope you will take away from the past 2.5 months is that yes, Singapore should care about the Middle East because whatever happens in the Middle East will have an impact on us in Southeast Asia, whether it be through the question of identity, or in terms of the role of religion in politics, or in terms of the geopolitics, such as the adjustments underway between US and China. And the second key takeaway is that we cannot take a narrow view of the Middle East. And I guess this was also the aim of our lecture today on Central Asia. I mean, the initial reaction would be, why are we talking about Central Asia? But in choosing to close the series by looking at Central Asia, we wanted to kind of take a step back and consider the broader picture and to highlight the interconnectedness of the Eurasian landmass. It includes both Middle East and Southeast Asia. And I guess, by the way, Singapore is at the southernmost tip of the Eurasian landmass. So on that note, we hope that you have found all the lectures this year useful and enriching. Thank you to everyone who has joined us, and thank you once again to all our speakers. We've been very glad that we've had people tuning in from overseas as well. So we're very grateful, and we look forward to your continued support for our future events.